Thank you for joining us today. My name is Juliana, and as this gets connected, I will, oh, there we go, perfect. So today I'll be talking about the use of culturally unfamiliar music by elementary music and all subject classroom teachers. The impetus for this came from a grant that Patricia Sheehan Campbell and myself are part of on behalf of the University of Washington, and it is on the grounds of connecting culture in childhood from the Canadian Social Science and Humanities Research Council, wherein we're looking at applications of archived children's music, so older recordings of children's music being repatriated, so reintroduced to their cultures of origin. And that's not what I'm talking about today, but what came before our investigation of repatriation and archived recordings is our need to investigate what teachers are currently doing in case, as we develop, I'm not sure what's happening there, as we develop a curriculum for students, we are aware of what teachers are implementing, what their resources are, what their habits are, and what their needs are. So we are working with other countries, fields, and universities, and out of this grant came this pilot study, of which I will present. So the purpose was to examine K-6 teachers, especially elementary general music specialists, and all subject classroom teachers' perspectives on culturally unfamiliar music. There were several guiding questions, the first being, how do teachers define unfamiliar music, and what are their approach and avoid behaviors with that? How are teachers designing their curriculum? How are they framing student interests, identities, and needs in the curricular design? And what resources are teachers already aware of? And so this builds on a significant body of work that's already been established on diversity and multiculturalism within music education and education at large, as was brought up in today's keynote. And so building on that, I employed an predominantly interview methodology, and I also used observations and collected material culture, and in my analysis performed multiple rounds of open coding for salient themes. Within the interviews, they were semi-structured. They averaged 40 to 120 minutes each, and that was fully dependent on the teacher's experience and responses. And because it was semi-structured, it would just unfold as I spoke with these teachers. And in total, we had 17 hours of interviews. The topics ranged from musical and teaching background, school environment and demographics, curriculum structure, especially pertaining to unfamiliar music, resources they know and or use, but most importantly, why they make the curricular choices that they do. The participants themselves were 13 in total. 4 of them were general elementary classroom, all subject teachers. 9 of them were general elementary music teachers, all from the Pacific Northwest. 2 were male, 11 female, 11 white, and then 2 identifying as Southeast Asian, and between their 20s and their 50s with about 1 to 25 years of experience. So I had a really wide breadth of experience in these interviews, which really added some richness to the data that I was able to collect. So in going to the data, one of the first conversations that I had with teachers was about the concept of unfamiliar. And without priming them, I wanted to find out how they defined it as classroom teachers, as music teachers. And what I found was that across the board, with the exception of one teacher, everyone considered unfamiliar music as culturally unfamiliar music. Music that is not my own. Music that I do not personally represent, which I thought was really interesting. And so in exploring these concepts further, there came through several important factors. First, of self-efficacy, the confidence in approaching culturally unfamiliar music. Teacher education as a background and experience in being able to implement it within the curriculum. External support, especially from administration. And then, of course, the one that all teachers know well, the issue of time. And These factors became especially salient through all of the interviews with some particular quotes that stood out. It's kind of hard to stay motivated at the job when I learned this year how unsupportive my principal is. After I took that class, I got really inspired to do a lot of world drumming stuff with my kids of all ages. The challenge is that how many minutes do you have in your classroom? I think a lot of teachers hit these walls of just like, shit, I want to do this right, but I barely see my kids. So then in thinking about these factors, and thinking about all the reasons teachers may or may not, there was an even deeper underlying issue, and that was fear. Being scared. And it wasn't just a generalized fear, there was specific fear. There was fear of inauthenticity, of being offensive, mistreating another person's culture, or doing it wrong. And that these were significant obstacles for these teachers. One of them said, I get really nervous about not representing it correctly or picking something that could be offensive somehow. I'm so nervous I'm going to sing it wrong or it's going to somehow not be appropriate. I think you got to be so careful because it's one of those well-intentioned things that we try to do to be multicultural that could be bad. And you don't want to narrow kids' ideas because the other danger I have with that is that you don't want white kids thinking that Filipino kids just listen to that, or that Native Americans just walk into Native American chanting all day long. I don't want to appropriate this music. I don't want to give them misinformation. And it's hard to want to go in this direction, but also not know where to go. It's like, yes, we want to do good things, but we also want to make sure we do it in a way that's respectful and doesn't hurt anyone. But then when I was listening to these teachers talk about this fear, there was another underlying reason why, despite talking about why they didn't want to approach it, they still felt embedded within them a duty. And that duty lied within social justice. So why is it important that we have these conversations? Why do we need to bring this into the classroom? Why is it eating at my conscience that despite my fear, I know I should be doing this? Well, within social justice, there were concepts of multiculturalism and specifically student identity and student interest being at the core of why incorporating culturally unfamiliar music in the classroom is important. What it means to kids' identity, that's the takeaway. That's where their meaning is. That's where you understand yourself and the greater society. I feel like people need to check their biases because if you don't, it will come out eventually. And we will have biases against a certain group of people, and they'll happen to be in your classroom. They're going to show in very bad ways. The whole dead white composer comment that people like to make, I mean, then just do something about it. I would say the best media made for children takes into account their interests and their level of understanding. And if you're not having a conversation and being open to them bringing some of their interests into the classroom, they're just going to shut off. So that concept of interest kept coming back, of bringing it to the students. What do the students want? What do the students think? Why do we teach? And as they talked, there were teachers who weren't so terrified that they would completely hold back. There were teachers who did some. And the first step that they talk about is that they try. One of the greatest obstacles to overcome sometimes is yourself. And in that first step, by taking a first step, you are trying. Next came the idea of it being good enough for your students. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to have 20 years of experience learning how to do that one style of music. It just has to be good enough to present to them. And that you leave space for student interest. And that is kind of at the core of your inspiration. That's where you draw your inspiration in developing your curriculum. You provide multiple options and entries, especially in two examples being that you provide multiple versions of the same song, and then you provide multiple songs of the same concept. And this definitely came up more and more. But two more in particular, one which is ask questions, and then the follow-up which is have conversations. And so these approaches, teachers mentioned in almost every single one, despite also saying that they believe that they only do it minimally, if at all, and that they don't feel like that's good enough. But if it's good enough for the students, they say, then you're trying and you're working your way there. In the end, I wasn't perfect at it. I felt like I had at least dug into it a little bit and could speak a little bit more to my students about it. At least I'm where I need to be to teach my kids. Now let's listen and see what other people have done with the song. And it's not necessarily that I want to show them, like, this is how we do it, this is the right way to do it. It's like, this is one way to do it. The original source material for the recording is always best. If you know what that is, sometimes we don't even know, right? This is traditional. What does that mean? Well, I don't know. It was way before me. So I do as best as I can to find contrasting versions of the same piece. And if you have a wonderfully multicultural curriculum, completely authentically cultural representation in many different ways, if you aren't talking to the kids about what you're doing and peeling back your thought process, then I don't think that there's a lot of meaning to it. So then, in thinking about these factors, in the self-efficacy, the teacher education, external support, and time that came up as constant obstacles or gateways and enablers, and in thinking about the approach mechanisms, trying, making it good enough, creating space for students, asking questions, having conversations, and providing multiple entries, there appeared to be this reciprocal process. So you can see at the top that if you start with experience and resources, and that can come from professional development, that can come from your pre-service learning, that can come from adequate time and support from your administration, that leads to self-efficacy, which is confidence. And self-efficacy in itself leads to effort, your willingness to execute action. And within that effort, teachers talked about doing some research and making sure that it is good enough. That effort translated into interaction with their students, where they asked questions and they talked. That interaction in themselves, according to these teachers, acted in its own way as another layer of experience. So in a feedback loop, the more that they enacted this process, the more confident they became, the more that their self-efficacy developed, and the more that they felt like they could do it, increasingly over time. But as any cycle, as soon as it breaks, then you lose that momentum. So if you don't have that professional development to feel confident, to develop that self-efficacy, then you're not going to translate that into effort and subsequent interaction. Or let's say that you get to the effort part, but then something happens and you don't have the opportunity to enact that within your classroom. Then you don't get that interaction and you don't get that next layer of experience that reminds you, okay, this worked, that did not work, this time I'll try this worked really well, and then building on that self-efficacy. And so that was really crucial. And at the center of all of this was student interest and identity, that all the teachers talked about how important it was for their students to be at the core of their reasons for including musical cultures and culturally unfamiliar music from outside of their pre-established curriculum. There were resources that they frequently talked about, with the most predominant being Smithsonian Folkways, where you have pre-built lesson plans, and you have just an incredible array of music that you can buy by album, by song, and within each album you've got the album notes that have information from the person that went and collected the recordings themselves. You have Teachers Pay Teachers, the Association for Cultural Equity, which is similar to Smithsonian Folkways. You have other music teachers, opportunities within your district or at conferences like this. And then you have people or specific resources or CDs like Ella Jenkins, which was named by at least 5 of the interviewees. So then in drawing upon all this information, there are significant implications for multiple levels. The first being teacher training and professional development. By allowing the exploration or the discussion of or the implementation of culturally unfamiliar music within teacher training and professional development, there is a higher likelihood that teachers will embody that self-efficacy that allows them to go into a classroom and say, this isn't mine, but at least I know how to do it good enough. And then with curriculum development, are teachers equipped with the tools and the resources to be able to develop it on their own? Research skills being one of those. Administrative support. Principals were talked about as a gateway. They either pushed along and said, great, I trust you, no problem, or they said, I don't like that, I think you should just stick to your book and just let that be. And as those conversations unfolded, it directly affected teachers' sense of self-efficacy and support in being able to experiment and enact these culturally unfamiliar curricula and pedagogy in their classroom. And then we move on to social justice and multiculturalism because, as you heard in the keynote today, and as a lot of the research in music education discusses, is that we're constantly changing. We are evolving with our own politics, with our own economics, with our own time. And social justice and multiculturalism is very much at the heart of what we do because we don't know who our students are going to be in our classrooms. We get to know them. And as we get to know them, we get to understand their identities. And cultural identity, ethnic identity, individual identity, identity on multiple levels is crucial to how students learn and how we as teachers interact with them, which then goes into student identity and interest, being at the focal point of what all of these teachers feel is the reason why we venture into unknown territory, why we include culturally unfamiliar music, because it's necessary to connect with your students, and through that connection, as was told numerous times, hopefully we engender a love and a passion for music that transcends beyond our 1 year of teaching with them, or that one class we have with them, or that 1 week. It goes into a lifelong interest in music, hopefully music performance, in whatever manifestation that is, but at the very least, a love of music and a genuine relationship with it. And so, this is the start of this project, and this is what we have so far. But I'm really excited about what we found, and I would like to thank you so much for your time and your listening. Thank you.